Horror on the Orient Express, Chapter 6, Part 2, Burning Waters. Thunder roared over the San Marco Basilica. Huddled up around the defiled floor of the Chapel of St. Isidoro, Claudia, Elijah, Giovanni, and Leopold whispered in hushed tones about what they should do next. Elijah was still holding the mysterious yellowed letter. Giovanni noticed an odd sigil on its cover in the form of a cherub cradling a doll, a coat of arms well known to Italians as that of the Gramanzi family, famed Venetian doll makers. The group unanimously decided it was too late in the night to inquire about the Gramanzi, but Claudia and Elijah still had vengeance on their minds. Claudia told her fellow travelers about Alberto Rossini's house and the distraught young woman she had caught a glimpse of. Giovanni and Leopold hesitated upon hearing Claudia's plea to join them. The priest, collected and calm, gently said,
"Do you remember what happened in Milan, when we all went to jail, or the hospital?"
Giovanni, this poor girl clearly went through horrendous hardships.
But Miss Eddie, giving in to anger is not the Christian thing to do.
In a modern world, women shouldn't be treated this way.
Breaking the argument, Elijah suggested that they investigate Alberto's villa on false pretenses. They could pretend to be there on account of a risk of leprosy in the district or house. After all, they did have a legitimate doctor in their midst. Giovanni, only half convinced, suggested they fetch a monk or priest of the basilica to help them get inside Alberto's house. A Venetian face might help open a few doors. The priest headed for the dormitory, where he found a monk half asleep. As soon as the brother heard the word leprosy, he stood up and joined Giovanni. The monk uttered in hushed tones that a rumor was spreading concerning several kids who had been hospitalized, all covered with boils and blackened skin. Leopold still felt the plan was on shaky ground, and seeing his hesitation, Claudia launched herself into a speech about the duty of a gentleman to defend the weak and the innocent. Not wanting to argue any longer, Leopold joined his fellow travelers at the house of Alberto Rossini. Hailing a vaporetto, the group made haste toward the dreaded mansion. They arrived on the pontoon shortly thereafter. The stormy night prevented them from seeing beyond their noses. They could only make out the faces of two guards lit by the embers of their cigarettes. A sudden jolt of worry overcame Claudia. What if it were the same guards that had rebuked her earlier? She begged Leopold for his coat, but for the young Belgian private eye, this was asking too much. Giovanni intervened, lending the dilettante a simple winter coat. Claudia then went to the vaporetto and borrowed the hat of the captain. With such an accoutrement, she hoped to be let inside.
Good doctor, I shall be your assistant.
Very well, Claudia.
Seeing Elijah, Claudia, and the monk head toward the villa, Giovanni and Leopold decided to hang back, waiting to see if Elijah and Claudia's masquerade would work. With the help of the monk as a translator, the two conniving companions instilled a remnant of fear within the guards, who opened the door before standing aside. Giovanni, raising an eyebrow, approached the guards and started making small talk to keep them busy, while Leopold slid inside, just behind Elijah, Claudia, and the monk. The house was dimly lit, a few lamps bleeding an orange glow. In the atrium, checkered marble coursed along the floor, leading to 3 doors on the left and a staircase on the right. Recalling which room the young woman had been ushered into, Claudia beckoned Elijah to follow her to the first door on the left. Uninterested, Leopold made for the stairs despite Claudia begging him to come.
Think about your father,
the occultist said in an audible whisper as the private eye climbed the stairs. Leopold did not bother answering. He thought to himself that it was exactly what he was doing. He had no interest in being here defending the pauper and miserable. As he reached the landing of the first floor, his mind went from his father to Rose. The Belgian wondered how the maid was doing. On the other side of town at Maria's house, Bice was clearing the table after a light supper. Despite Rose's best efforts to help, Maria's maid was too proud to let her guest do anything. Instead, Rose took great interest in listening to Maria's stories about her father and about her sweet Giorgio. Suddenly, someone knocked at the door. The muffled voice of Alberto asked to see Maria. Rose stiffened. The maid looked at all the windows and potential exits. In a second, she grabbed Maria by the hand and ushered her into a side room before drawing the curtains. Before closing the door to the room, Rose mouthed to Bice to block all view into the apartment. The Italian maid hectically closed each curtain until she tripped on a rug, dragging one curtain down with her. The knock on the door became a pounding. Bice rose, composed herself, and headed to the door. Rose stuck her ear against the wood in the hopes of hearing the conversation. Alberto was attempting to worm his way into the pension, but Bice stood firm. When the blackshirt realized the maid would not let him in, he tried to shove her aside, but Bice fought back. The next second, Rose heard a splash in the water and the growl of an angry man yelling, "I will gut you, Bice. I will be back." Counting the minutes, Rose waited patiently, her hand on Maria's mouth. When she deemed all was clear, she opened the door. Bice sat at the dining table, sharpening one of the kitchen knives. Smiling at this sight, Rose grabbed furniture and started barricading the house.
We will remove these come morning, but I am not taking any chances tonight.
Claudia and Elijah entered a cramped room with 2 metal bunk beds. On each mattress, a woman lay shackled and drowsy, uttering nonsense. They wore tattered robes, their skin displaying odd marks, wounds, and symbols stretching from the arms and legs onto the stomach. Elijah stepped out to wave discreetly at Giovanni to come over. The monk, worried at such a sight, took the opportunity to trade places with the priest and headed outside to distract the guards.
Father, would you mind helping us? It seems like we might have a few lepers.
Giovanni, recognizing the heretical nature of the symbols, muttered under his breath,
Whoever has dedicated themselves to these practices is tainted.
These are poor souls in need of help. They might have been forced into this wretched situation for all you know, Giovanni. Would you forsake them?
That is not what Jesus would do.
Taken aback by the vitriol, Giovanni looked over the faces of Claudia and Elijah. Both were genuinely concerned about the well-being of the 4 women. To the priest, it felt like they were rushing into something they did not understand. Upstairs, Leopold entered a wide room with lacquered and painted panels on the walls and ceiling. In the center stood a 4-poster bed, draped in beige silk sheets and linen curtains. The room reeked of sweat and sourness. To his right, Leopold noticed torture instruments, whips, batons, sticks and crosses onto which victims could be stretched. At the detective's feet, a wide pentagram of salt stood ominously, dying candles guttering at each cardinal point. To the left, next to a great window, an old oak desk was crumbling under mountains of papers and books. Only one lay open. The oppressive air of the room sickened Leopold. Simply standing in the doorway made him queasy. On instinct, he deftly grabbed the open book and headed back downstairs. In the cramped little room, Elijah tore the shackles away from one of the captives. As he moved on to the other 3 prisoners, the freed woman looked at the doctor and whispered tearfully, "I don't want to go. Don't make me leave. If I leave this beautiful home, I will die." Intrigued by such an irrational statement, Claudia approached the woman and touched her skin. She felt a cloud of obedience shrouding the captive's mind and something else, a living body, a baby. The wretched thing was pregnant. Going from one woman to the next, Claudia realized with horror that all of them were with child. Trying to reassure his 4 patients, Elijah said,
I will clean you from the ink and symbols to assess your wounds. And then we will bring you to the nearest hospital to make sure your babies are healthy.
All 4 captives stirred from their torpor, murmuring how good Alberto had been to them, how much of a saint he was. Claudia cajoled them, reassuring them that they would be all right and that they had to leave for the sake of their children. Giovanni put his hand on the occultist's shoulder.
Claudia, Elijah, let these poor souls rest. They want to stay. Listen to them. I am not sure we should do anything until we know more about their situation.
Father, you are such a man. Giovanni, there is a child inside each woman. They've been beaten, repeatedly ravaged, and you would do nothing to help them.
I believe we are being tested.
No, you are being tested, Father.
Baffled by his companion's reaction, Giovanni stepped out of the room. and found Leopold peering into the adjacent chamber. The private eye slowly closed the door.
12 black shirts, all sound asleep and boozy. We'd better be careful. Say, Father, would you mind coming upstairs with me? There is something you ought to see.
Dragging the priest back upstairs, Leopold showed him the pentagram. The man of the cloth crossed himself. The Belgian shoved the stolen book into Giovanni's hands. After a glance at its contents, Giovanni realized that Alberto was attempting to create monstrous spawns.
The women mustn't be moved.
With a kick of his foot, the priest disrupted the circle of salt, but as soon as he stepped onto the landing, he noticed Claudia and Elijah dragging the poor women outside. One woman cried. In a pink mist of blood, a fish-like creature burst from her belly. It writhed and hissed, its teeth like razors. Leopold and Giovanni quickly barricaded themselves back in the chamber. Claudia tapped Elijah on the shoulder, yelling for him to run. The occultist ripped off Giovanni's coat and threw it over the monstrosity, which shook it away with its scales. The two companions dashed out, stunning the guards, and the monk caught unawares. The other three captives shrieked in terror as their bodies were torn asunder. Crawling from their intestines, three more fish-like creatures slithered onto the floor. All four beasts hissed and sniffed the air. They lurched toward Claudia and Elijah, but were met by the guards. One was swiftly decapitated, another bitten from within. The occultist and the doctor were seized by the monk, who hopped on the vaporetto and ordered the captain to depart immediately, leaving Claudia and Elijah racing across the sidewalks from one islet to another. Inside, Giovanni and Leopold looked at each other.
I think a cleansing fire is in order.
Entering the room one final time, Leopold and Giovanni toppled the candles and hurled one onto the bed before heading to the window and leaping into the reeking waters of Venice. The four travelers regrouped 2 streets farther away, listening to the horrified cries of guards, the tearing of flesh, and the crackling of fire. Stunned and terrified, they returned to the hotel, sleep eluding them until the earliest hours of morning. They were woken by the sound of boots in the morning, as if a military parade were marching through Venice. Each investigator heard someone knocking at their respective door. Giovanni and Elijah opened to find a member of the staff. Confused and ashamed, the hotel's concierge recommended they remain inside the hotel, or better yet, leave Venice post-haste. Troops had been deployed to assist the police due to the untamed unrest sweeping the city. Several houses had been burned during the night, a crazed mob had lynched an epileptic, and more reports came pouring in of people stricken with plague after a swim in the canals. Leopold did not deign to open the door. An envelope was pushed under the threshold, informing him of the state of unrest in Venice. He went back to bed, closing his eyes, until he was startled by a knock on his window. Claudia stood there in her nightgown.
Terribly sorry, Leopold. You see, someone knocked on my door, and I was afraid it would be Blackshirts. I had to jump over 2 balconies and disturb an elderly gentleman who was enjoying his morning coffee.
You are speaking too quickly for my taste, Claudia. It was just some news bulletin about the mess Venice is in. Should I walk you back to your room so that you can get dressed for breakfast?
A stone's throw away, Rose helped Maria get ready for the funeral. The red-headed maid forced her to eat, giving her at least a modicum of strength, while Bice assisted her mistress into a black-trimmed coat.
You need to be as strong as you can be, Maria.
Tears welled in the young Italian woman's eyes. Rose gave her a hug, a sliver of kindness on a harsh day. The maid went downstairs, clearing away the barricades she had built during the night, just in time before the local priest, the undertaker, and his underlings arrived to escort the casket. Elijah, Claudia, and Leopold were in the hotel's restaurant, enjoying an invigorating breakfast. Giovanni joined them a bit later, greeting them with a warm smile and a nod.
Apologies for the tardiness. I could not find my coat for the life of me. Miss Eddie, I recall handing it to you yesterday evening.
It might have caught fire.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Where is my coat?
It was purified by fire.
Oh, said the priest, saddened to hear one of his favorite garments, of which there were only a few, had gone up in smoke. The investigators sat together, gathering strength and sketching a plan for the day. A letter signed by Maria was brought by one of the clerks, an official invitation to attend her father's funeral. As the clerk left the table, he was met by one of his counterparts, who whispered that the hotel might be harboring arsonists. He proceeded to give a quick description of the priest, the private eye, the doctor, and an assistant. The group, catching wind of the gossip, sank in their seats, eyeing the reception where a small detachment of policemen questioned the staff. Each traveler left naturally and inconspicuously. Thanking her stroke of genius regarding her disguise, Claudia strolled through the front door. Elijah, Leopold, and Giovanni all took a back exit. The Belgian waved goodbye to his comrades, heading for the library to uncover more information about the Gramanzi family. Elijah wished to go to the hospital to investigate how the plague might have resurfaced. Giovanni took a long and scenic route through Venice to reach the funeral on time. On the other side of the hotel, Claudia sped toward the nearest hospital. Brashly asking for directions had brought the occultist to the San Giovanni and Paolo Hospital. Waltzing into the reception, she asked if any of the children who had caught the plague the day before were housed there. A nurse confirmed it, and Claudia demanded if it was possible to speak to them, pretending to be a researcher working for the American Health Review. Stunned by such credentials, the nurse guided Claudia to a room, asking her to don mask and gloves. Inside, 5 children lay on camp beds, their faces pale and blackened as if covered in bad bruises. Swollen boils rimmed by necrosis and filled with pus deformed their skin, oozing liquid onto the sheets. The occultist held back a gag and tried to call on the forces of the beyond for a sign. The children squirmed in fear, Claudia's eyes looking menacing and dark. Feeling their distress, the nurse asked her to leave. Nodding, Claudia left candies on a side table and thanked the nurse. Outside, the occultist felt tears roll down her cheeks, which she swiftly wiped away. Elijah was walking toward her, also hoping to discuss the plague and interview a few patients. Claudia agreed to wait for him outside, and the Canadian disappeared through the old hospital gate. The doctor had an easier time justifying himself and was promptly brought to the bedside of an ailing Englishman. The poor fellow had boils under his throat, giving him a toad-like appearance. Elijah examined the patient, each discovery pointing to the bubonic plague. Such an illness was out of place and out of time for a modern city like Venice. His conviction was that this sickness was stemming from the supernatural. Thanking the hospital staff, he left quickly, joining Claudia and sharing his discoveries. They then headed for the shops, Elijah in search of new clothes to avoid being detected by the police, Claudia for an extensive drawing set of charcoals and paper. Each enjoyed the company of the other. They discussed the occult extensively, asked around for statues that might have been recently repaired, and queried passers-by about the plague. They finally split ways, Claudia returning to the hotel while the good doctor would attend the funeral. Leopold made his way to the Biblioteca Marciana, pulling books from the shelves left and right on the history of Venice and its great families. The Belgian was worried that his friends were wasting time and that the recent unrest in town was the work of the leg of the simulacrum. Frantically turning pages, the detective uncovered that the Gramanzi family had been one of the major Venetian dynasties. Together with the Dandolo, they still lived in the Campo del Bambino, only a few streets away from the library. Myths and legends recounted that the Gramanzi family had used magic to infuse their dolls, building singing birds and moving statues, which Leopold attributed to mere automatons. One historical account mentioned that a Gramanzi had been accused of witchcraft in the 16th century, burning dolls fashioned in the likeness of his political rivals in hopes of casting misfortune on them. No proof was ever found. Satisfied with his discoveries, Leopold decided to take a nap behind his stack of books, still weary from the previous night's ordeal. Rose gave a discreet wave to Giovanni and Elijah as they arrived at the church for the ceremony. She had saved them a spot on one of the pews. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects to Maria's father, professors, students, university staff, and family from Venice and Milan. Giovanni spotted Giorgio a few rows away, inconspicuous in bourgeois dress. No one would have recognized him. Just behind the investigators, Elijah noticed Alberto, sullen, angered, dark circles under his eyes, his throat covered by a rash, which could well indicate the plague. A coil of dread seized the doctor. Elijah murmured to Giovanni that he would appreciate it if the priest and Leopold checked themselves for symptoms as they had fallen into the water. The ceremony and the following burial were unbearable to most. The stench of the water made the officiating priest almost nauseous, and some attendants simply wanted to slip away as discreetly as possible. It was nearly evening when the burial ended. Alberto stormed off, too angry even to speak to Maria, something gnawing at his mind. Maria's close family was invited over for pastries and coffee at her pensione, and she extended the invitation to Rose, Elijah, and Giovanni. Before going to Maria, they were stopped by Giorgio, who anxiously asked how he might properly request Maria's hand. Rose gave him counsel. He should go to Maria, ask for a few minutes alone as if he were a relative paying his respects, and then decide together what to do. The group headed back to the pension, where Giorgio asked to see Maria in private. She recognized him up close, unable to hide a smile. When they returned after a few minutes, Giorgio told the investigators they had agreed to marry the next day and take the first train to Milan, where they could hide among Maria's family. The brash Italian offered his friends a ride to the hotel as he planned to return home by gondola. Elijah, fearing for his safety, decided to accompany him. Rose tagged along, while Giovanni stayed a while longer. Maria soon approached Giovanni, asking if he would be willing to marry her and Giorgio. He agreed. She then inquired about him, how he was doing.
I am fantastic. It is a blessed day for your father, who is now among the angels of God.
Is Miss Eddie all right?
She will be, I hope.
Rose held back her anger. One night, she had taken off for one night, and Miss Eddie had nearly died at the throat of a fish brood. Elijah was beside himself, recounting the events of last night sent a queer chill down his spine. The only thing Rose managed to utter was a sly, "Impressive." Giorgio paid no attention to their conversation, too focused on the gondolier's erratic course. The man took detour after detour, telling Giorgio to relax each time he raised his voice. Sweat beaded on the gondolier's brow. Rose caught the wave of anxiety in his eyes. Suddenly they forked into another Rio, where a gang of blackshirts hailed them from the bank. Rose carefully drew her gun, pointing it at the gondolier, and asked Giorgio to translate. If he did not turn back, he would die before landing the gondola at the pier. The man, drenched in sweat, plunged his staff into the water, swirling the gondola around as the blackshirts hurled insults after them. Night fell swiftly over Venice as all the investigators regrouped at the palazzo. Worried about Leopold, Elijah and Rose headed for his room. The Belgian opened the door, his hair damp from a recent shower. Barely meeting Rose's eyes, he shyly greeted the maid, recalling the peck on the cheek she had given him in Lausanne. He let both friends in. Elijah examined his body while Rose waited in the vestibule. Happy to announce that Leopold was free of plague, the doctor and the maid returned to their respective rooms.
I may not agree with your view on humankind. However, I am deeply sorry about your coat. Here is something for you.
Giovanni stared at the elegant drawing set, charcoals and sketching paper handed to him by Claudia.
You are more than adequate, Father.
Understanding that this was the extent of an apology à la Eddie, Giovanni blushed ever so slightly. He took the kit with reverence before toying with one of the charcoals. Having made her apology, Claudia headed to her room, where Rose waited. The occultist was offended at the idea that her maid had slept far from her, and it took her a few minutes to warm up to Rose. They shared their adventures and accounts of the previous days. When dinner arrived, they all reconvened in Elijah's room and ordered room service to avoid the policeman patrolling the restaurant. Leopold wanted to go out into the night and investigate the Gremancy house, but his companions tempered his sleuthing fervor. They agreed they would visit the Gremancy after marrying Giorgio and Maria and seeing them safely off. A frantic knock on the door woke Rose early in the morning. It was Bice. Maria was being held hostage in her own home. Alberto and 6 blackshirts had stormed the apartment and were planning to force her into marriage. They had locked her away in the study on the 2nd floor of the pension. Bice had waited for Alberto to leave to fetch a priest, using the pretense of visiting a sick aunt to slip away. Rose instructed her to search for Giorgio while she rallied her companions. Closing the door quickly, she rushed for her bag. Claudia noticed something in her behavior that sent a quiver down her spine. The maid opened her bag and drew out a gun and a silencer.
Rose, a gun?
How do you think you stay protected, Miss Eddie?
Protected from what?
From enemies. Shadowless enemies. You've been pretty safe since Antarctica, haven't you? You're welcome.
The 5 companions huddled at the side of the pensione where Maria was held hostage. The Rio's black water licked the pavement furiously. Claudia erected a plan. She would introduce herself as a long-lost aunt who had missed the funeral of Maria's father by a day. Rose cut in. She already knew the best route into the pensione from the 2nd floor. She would climb up, neutralize any blackshirts, and return.
Are you really going to kill someone?
Claudia whispered.
I started killing when I was 10. I know what I am doing.
Seeing Rose's cold calm, Leopold felt a surge of attraction. Her assertiveness suited her. Catching himself, he realized he could dangerously fall for her.
So Rose will climb upstairs and shoot 6 people. What are the chances they won't hear the muffled shots?
I could distract the guards.
Giovanni offered.
They know your face. Best if I play the distraught aunt to support Rose's plan.
Perfect. Elijah, Leopold, and Giovanni, keep watch for Alberto or Bice.
Claudia knocked at the door while Rose made for the inner courtyard. The occultist's performance was riveting. The black shirt at the entrance never stood a chance. She sobbed heavily, almost fainting, begging to be let inside.
My own husband's brother's funeral. How dreadful.
The black shirt let her in and offered coffee. Soon she was surrounded by 4 other black shirts who tried to comfort her. Rose opened the window deftly and slid into the house. She crept to the study and pulled the knob gently. 2 black shirts guarded Maria. One stared at the window, the other flipped pages through a book. Rose held her breath. 2 muffled shots, one through the head, the other through the throat. They never stood a chance. She dashed to Maria, who was about to scream, and covered her mouth with gloved hands.
Follow me, and all will be fine.
Outside, Elijah spotted Bice arriving in a water taxi with Giorgio. The young man had been beaten senseless during the night, a split lip, a blackened eye. Black shirts had thrown him in a bin behind his apartment. He wanted to storm Maria's house, and it took both Giovanni and Elijah to keep him from spoiling the plan. Soon Rose appeared with Maria in tow. The 2 lovers embraced and the group made for a vaporetto. Leopold slid under the kitchen window, gesturing to Claudia to leave. Faking the verge of fainting, the occultist was brought back to the entrance of the pensione. She suddenly dashed out, leaving the black shirts befuddled and confused. On Giovanni's suggestion, the group took several detours to avoid suspicion from the blackshirts and the police until they reached the train station. There, Giovanni performed a quick ceremony away from prying eyes with Elijah and Leopold, acting as witnesses for the couple. Rose gave Maria money for the trip. Claudia handed over a few jewels. They boarded the train together with Bice, and an instant later the train slipped away into the mist of the lagoon. Now the 5 companions only had to find a leg before disappearing themselves.